The button logos was an attempt of mine to kind of make the presentation credit feel like it was, you know, not two companies presenting a movie, but a sort of conjoined effort of two companies to bring this movie to fruition.
Mm, mm. What are you looking at, Caroline?
The breathing thing, which is interesting because she committed to this idea early on. I mean, she'd worked in an old folks home, and I certainly had been able to describe, my experience with watching my father die was that this breathing thing that happens is it's so disconcerting and it creates this anxiety. And she was committed to this idea, and she came in and she really did it. I mean, probably, we joked that it added a reel to the movie because of all the laboring of the breathing, but it was really critical, I think, in order to make sure that this doesn't look like one of those, it's not a pretty deathbed.
My mouth full of cotton.
One of the interesting things about how we scheduled the movie was that we had shot all of Benjamin's life or Benjamin's story, all the stuff from Louisiana and Montreal and the stage stuff in Los Angeles. So we had all that sort of cut together. And it was an interesting thing being able to take these two actors who, have probably 10 or 15 minutes of screen time in this interstitial framing device and show them the movie that they were going to be in and show them the flashbacks that they were going to be commenting on. It's also sort of a scary thing because, of course, they can still quit the movie after. So you show it to them and they walk out and you kind of go, what'd you think? And then, it's interesting. It's interesting. It is sort of a weird notion. I can't imagine for Julia, it would have been like, well, there's this whole other movie that's already taken place. So you're kind of being brought in as the icing. But she was a really good sport about it.
They built a train station.
The makeup on Kate was one of these things that it was pretty much Greg Canham left to his own devices and working with Kate to sort of define what her face was going to look like in its oldest incarnation. And we were, trying to kind of get her makeup down to about 2 or 3 hours a day. But the makeup that you see here is probably 5 hours. She had to sit in a chair and have that stuff applied. So by the time she got to us, she was already so exhausted that being lethargic came pretty easily.
Mr. Cake. He was married to a Creole of Evangeline Parish, and they had a son. Mr. Gatto was from birth absolutely blind. When their son was old enough, he joined the army. They prayed.
The Gatto sequence was something that was in Eric's script. It was there from the very beginning. There were a lot of things that were in the first draft of the script that were excised because they somehow didn't connect to what was happening in the modern summation. And this was one that he felt very strongly about, and it was one of the elements of the story, or one of the tracks of the story, that everybody encouraged us to get rid of because it didn't really connect to Benjamin. There was no. We talked one time about seeing Brad walk through the train station on his way to going to visit Kate in New York, and to see him go through the train station and try to sort of connect it that way. But in the end, it was an interesting thing because I thought that it thematically worked, but because it doesn't pay off until literally the last shot of the movie, people were very confused about, the sort of dangling participle of it. And the interesting thing was, as soon as we kind of screwed up all the patina of the footage and had this flickering and scratches, it suddenly took it out of the presentation of the rest of the movie and made it okay for it to be this sort of tone poem as a framing device, tertiary framing device. When we tested the movie, people were like, well, what does that thing have to do with it? And then as soon as we kind of made it all flicker and look ye old timey, it allowed them to kind of relax and go, okay, well, this will be explained at some point. Or it'll never be explained, and it doesn't matter because it doesn't have anything to do with the way Kate's face looks or the way the rest of the flashbacks look.
To live long, full lives. Perhaps my own son might come home again.
There's just some beautiful matte paintings by Matte World Digital. We didn't have the money to build the whole train station. We couldn't find a train station. We were at one point thinking about going to Philadelphia and shooting that, but it was not cost effective.
Some say he died of a broken heart. Some say he went to sea.
Excuse me. Do you mind if I make a call? Somebody's watching my little boy.
Sure.
Originally, there was not a lot more substantive material in the hospital sequences. A lot more sort of character moments between the two of them that, but we ended up cutting this back to the bone just for length issues and making it as kind of terse and efficient as we could.
Suitcase. There's a diary.
In the first draft of the script, Daisy's deathbed was in the old folks' home, in the Nolan house, what we call the Nolan house. And it gave a kind of beautiful symmetry to the whole thing, but I just didn't want it to be Norman Rockwell. I didn't want it to be pretty. There's something about, this kind of just post-war building that's been refitted with, the most modern stuff you can find in 1987, and that was kind of the idea of it. Because the Nolan house is so exquisite, it's so beautiful architecturally, and with all of that, it just felt to me like it was gilding a gold lily.
I will go out of this world the same way I came in, alone and with nothing. All I have is my story, and I'm writing it now while I still remember it.
This is an interesting cross-dissolve in terms of, we wanted to place the fireworks to sort of frame her face. We didn't want them to kind of go, we didn't want it to be like her nose exploded. And so we had to kind of art direct where all the fireworks were going. But it was also an interesting kind of dovetail from Julia's voice into Brad's voice as he sort of takes over the introduction of the night that it all began. And it was an interesting thing because when the cadence was off, we used, a lot of different takes of his VO, and we ended up editing them so that the cadence could really match. Because it was one of those things that was just so odd. If her voice came in very slow and then he picked it up, and there was an odd handoff. And this is Jason Fleming, who I met with Brad one summer at his surf shack in Santa Barbara. And the first time I met Jason, he came in from a swim out in this oily kelp bed that was right outside the beach. And he came in and he looked like he was frozen or something. He had the wetsuit bottoms on, but he had gone swimming out at 7 o'clock in the morning in water that I think is only suitable for great whites. And in fact, there was that summer, I believe that there was this whole week-long period where KCAL they had a helicopter that just followed these great whites as they swam up the coastline north to Santa Barbara. And there was Jason, out for a morning swim in the kelp beds. And that's where I first met him. And I knew he was an actor because I knew him from Snatch and I knew him from Rockstar. But it never occurred to me that he could play. I had no idea who we were going to get to play Benjamin's father, and he sent us this DVD of his. There wasn't an audition, really. It was just kind of like, well, here's what I would do with this. I guess it was an audition, but because it came out of nowhere, Lorraine and I just popped it into the DVD player, and he was great, and we just thought, Well, call Jason and tell him he's got the he's got the gig. This is a radio-controlled baby that he's carrying, a little RC puppet that takes 3 guys to kind of like make it wiggle around, which is the state of the art in Hollywood. I mean, you see it in a lot of movies, and it's never good. I think the guys who did this did as good a job as you can do with the radio-controlled baby, but it always seems stupid to have 3 guys with little radio-controlled things making this thing wiggle inside a blanket. This scene between Queenie and Tizzy, between Mahershala Hashbaz and Taraji, these were the first people that we really cast. I mean, we had Brad and we had Kate, but our next problem was really who was going to play Queenie. And Lorraine Mayfield came in with a DVD of Hustle and Flow and showed me Taraji, and I had literally no idea how it applied. I was kind of like, this woman right here, this is the woman. And the original kind of concept that Eric had been playing with was this sort of Billie Holiday, this woman who came out and she sort of sang. And I just saw her as being much kind of, I don't know, there's something about Billie Holiday that seemed sort of otherworldly to me. And I always saw her as being just totally present and like the greatest, most kind of fearsome mother figure that you could imagine. Just like, she doesn't dote, but she will slap you upside the head if that's what it takes. And the notion that she was just so busy, she would be this person who really ran the whole place. And I mean, I could see that Taraji was an amazing actress, but I didn't, sometimes you need stuff to be obvious. So she came in and on a Saturday in 5 minutes, we were like, well, that's done. And Mahershala, I saw on an advertisement for a television show that he was doing, and I pointed it out to Sion and said, I think that's what Tizzy should be like. And Lorraine had a picture of Ali, and I said, well, yeah, let's bring this guy in. And again, it was like 5 minutes later, we were like, that's the guy. There's an important kind of notion for me in the relationship between Queenie and Tizzy, which is he's not her equal, but he's her partner. She's got a job running this place, really, and he's there to sort of support her. He cooks and he helps out, but they don't live together. She lives in her apartment under the stairs, and he lives back in the servants' quarters. And they're not married, but they have this kind of, they live with and for each other, and yet they also sort of live independently of each other. And I thought that was a really interesting thing in Eric's script, was that at no point is there an explanation for why they didn't get married or why they don't. It's just that people sometimes live apart and together at the same time. And I thought that was an interesting thing as it relates to later on in Benjamin's life, because there was a lot of conversation about why doesn't Benjamin marry Daisy. And there was actually a line of dialogue that was in the framing device where Daisy says, felt like we were married, 2 and 3 times a day. We always felt like we were sort of coming together and re-acknowledging our need and desire to be with one another. But in the end, that stuff sort of sifted out of the movie. One of the things I was really impressed with in the script was that, Eric never felt a need to sort of explain in either conventional or unconventional terms what these relationships were. They were just people who coexisted and wanted and needed one another, and sometimes they stayed together forever, and sometimes they went their separate ways. And certainly in Queenie and Tizzy's relationship, they're at odds a lot of times. And then he's gone, and there's no big, dramatic, sorrowful moment. She just says, oh, that's okay. That's the way it goes. So the actor playing Dr. Rose, his name's Patrick. I think he came from Atlanta. It was very difficult to put a cast together in New Orleans after Katrina because there were, so few working actors left. Most of them had to find work in Texas and in Georgia. And so we saw a tape of Patrick and thought, he's perfect. And he came in, and believe it or not, he did not have the mutton chop sideburns or the mustache. And that was something that Gene Black cooked up on the day. And he was so perfect in his disposition. I just loved sort of politely beleaguered.
Just not the kind of miracle one hopes to see.
I love his reaction to this. It's so, I love how matter of fact he just gets his coat and he leaves. There's absolutely no negotiating with Taraji. This is one of those situations where, we sort of replaced all of the servo motors of the remote control, the radio control baby. It was kind of going, and we had to loop the whole scene, and then, of course, put the baby noises all over it, and we might as well have used the production, because it was this baby going. And there were times I thought for sure, is that the servo motor? Is that a new baby sound? This is a little moment that was kind of created on the day. Tizzy wasn't originally supposed to be in this scene. He'd split, and he was off to go and celebrate the end of the war. But we put him sort of over her shoulder and had Taraji clock him. And originally it was supposed to cut to the elder statesman in the room saying, "Welcome to the club." But it was such a nice moment to put this, that she acknowledges him, but she's already decided, and there's a tacit understanding that as Queenie goes, so goes Tizzy. He's still very troubled by being outside the decision-making process, but wants to be supportive. At the same time, genuinely doesn't want to see her get her hopes invested in this creature that might be dead in a few days. And that was the line that was sort of invented on the day, which was might not even be humankind. Or it was based on an older draft. The draft that we were shooting didn't have that, and we kind of went back to that. And I like the notion that he's really trying to say, don't get invested in this thing, because it, kind of looks like this wrinkly old Shar-Pei. There's a funny thing about Taraji. I had this whole idea. I wanted her to be very earthy and kind of this pre-bohemian. You don't think of her in that way, but I wanted there to be this sort of earth mother kind of quality that she had. And of course, the first day that Brad shot, he came down to the stage and he was watching, and he walked over to me and he leaned in and he goes, "My mom's hot." I thought, oh, well, I don't know if we got the bohemian aspect of it. I love Julia's response that any of this is true, because it doesn't feel like she's reading a storybook. It just feels like she's kind of, the attitude of it, I think, was really beautiful.
Oh, just kept going. Yeah. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing shooting a movie with septa and octogenarians as extras, because, extras normally, from the standpoint of the production team, do not engender a lot of sympathy. In fact, a lot of times they're sort of considered to be the most problematic of departments. And it gave me a whole new kind of take on how difficult and kind of confusing the process of making movies is to people who have never read the script and have no idea what it is that you're trying to do. And these are people who are very frail. It's like you don't kind of realize how frail somebody who's 78 is until they have to kind of stand up and hold a glass of lemonade for 13 hours and be in continuity. So I have a newfound respect for extras. We literally could not have made this movie without the faces that Louisiana afforded us. Almost everybody was kind of memorable in their own specific way. I love this cue. It's not sweet, but it's very compassionate. It doesn't feel like it's overselling. And it was the first thing that we heard from Alexandre that we really went, this is it. We had a couple of cues. We'd been playing with the flashback to the Mr. Cake, and that sort of we were having a hard time kind of imagining what he was talking about. And this was the first cue that I really went, that's the sound of the movie. We're in the zone.
Themselves one way or another. But we all going the same way. Just taking different roads to get there, that's all. You on your own road, Benjamin.
Mama, how much longer I got?
Just be thankful for what you're giving here. You're already here longer than you're supposed to.
So there's, where the light breaks over Benjamin's face when he leans forward and sits up, or when he's being carried up the stairs, and you just get that little sheen on the top of his head, or the next shot where we're booming down and we just see his bald, liver-spotted head. We were trying so hard to figure out different ways to integrate him into the scenes where, we didn't have to be a performance. It could be a much more physical thing than hanging it all on a close-up of his face. I love it when you just see the top of his head over the back of his wheelchair. And then pretty much as far as I'm concerned, the shot of the movie is where he rises up and breathes on the glass, looks out the front door. And we really see how much he wants to be unbridled and not be a captive in his body.
Winslow U.S. Army retired, would raise the flag. Mrs. Sybil Wagner, once an opera singer, some know. Well, she sang Wagner.
This is a scene where, as we were shooting it, the visual effects supervisor, Eric Barba, from Digital Domain, came over and was saying, you can't, can he wear a collar, or can he have a necktie on? He's naked in a tub and he's going to have soap running down from the top of his head. And I was just like, you knew the job was dangerous when you took it. There were many discussions about whether or not I was getting ready to call Sam Mendes and ask him, like, I don't understand this Shakespeare. I don't understand what he's saying here. What's the RSC interpretation? And then I thought, it doesn't matter. It's the important thing is that he tries, that he remembers it as being this thing that's kind of regal in its presentation, and that's how he presents it.
From the wreck, so fair my limbs with long imprisonment, and these gray locks.
And I loved Ali's little take on being ignorant, which is, it is a joke to him. And of course, you cut to Benjamin and he's like, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. There's a little bit of, Eric Roth irony, the John Wilkes Booth part of this scene.
Never know what's coming for you.
The extras that we had in this scene deserve the highest commendation because it was brutal. We were in the city park, and of course it never fails to amaze me that when you ask anybody, okay, we're going to be shooting this in November, what's the weather going to be like? And they were, it'll be in the 50s, but it'll never get down into the 40s. And we had this idea that everybody would be kind of sweaty, it should look like a summer's night, and everybody should be in sort of summer wear, and sprayed them with water so they could all look sweaty. And then it was about 34 degrees outside, and everybody came up to me saying, it's never been this cold. And I was, as soon as you bring a camera out of the box, it's like, you're doomed. Lance, who plays the preacher, there's a funny story. We shot this scene in November of 2006, and by summer of 2007, we were shooting Benjamin going to visit Daisy in the hospital in Paris, but we were shooting on Wilshire Boulevard in an old theater. And there were, 18 semis out in front saying Benjamin Button on it. And all of a sudden, Lance Nichols comes walking in the lobby and looking around. And I looked over and I thought, what's the preacher doing in Paris? And he had this big smile on his face. And he came up to me and he said, you're still shooting this movie? He said, I've done 5 other movies in between seeing you in City Park and now finding you on Wilshire Boulevard. And it was great to see him, and it was humiliating.
And we gonna have you walk. In the name of God's glory, rise up.
And there's this moment where Benjamin rises up for the first time. He stands up, and the camera kind of tilts up with him and has to catch the top of his head. And we'd done like 16 or 17 takes, and the camera tilted up, and we kept cutting the top of his head. And finally we got one that we liked, and I looked and I realized that Taraji was standing there with her eyes closed, and there was no expression on her face at all. And I went up to her and I said, are you okay with everything? And she said, yeah, I'm fine. I said, you're sure? And she said, well, I have 103 fever. And I said, well, in this last take when we tilted up, you just seemed like you were in pain, or is everything? And she goes, oh, I didn't know you were going to see my face. So we had to go back and do one last one, and that's the one that's in the movie. So Peter Badalamenti, who played Benjamin's body for this scene, he's a stuntman. He's been a stunt player before, and I asked him to fall on his face. We'd made this sort of rubber mat that was painted like the wood, and so he could fall face first, which is not comfortable, but it's not unheard of. And he kept falling and catching himself, and I said, Peter, you gotta fall. And he was like, why don't you get up here and show me what it is that you want? So I went up in front, because I was pretty pissed off, and I went up in front, and I just fell face first into the floor and got up and said, just like that, and he said, well, yeah, but you only have to do it once. We had a tiny revolt on our hands. This is the kind of effects work that I love the most, is where you see Benjamin, right in the corner of the frame, just smiling, not doing much of anything else, and it's a it's a $20,000 effect shot to just have him as part of the sea of faces, I love that stuff.
There was a silence in the house.
So Bob Wagner had this idea when we were shooting this scene that we should have this piece of music playing that comes to this crescendo, and that we should give Ted Manson, who plays the man struck by lightning, we should give him these cymbals so that he could kind of crash them together at the end. And we didn't tell the cast because we wanted to get this pullback and they get this real reaction to the lunacy of somebody bringing cymbals to a funeral. And so he did that, and you can actually see Taraji almost jumps out of her shoes. This is Ted's last movie, passed on about a month or two before he ever saw the movie, but he was a wonderfully funny guy to work with, because he's so sweet and so polite. And he flew out for when we did the read-through of the script 5 months before we started shooting. He flew himself out and he came to the read-through in LA, and every time Ted would start in with his, did I ever tell you? People would just fall out of their chairs laughing, because he had this amazingly great squeaky voice that was, obviously aided and abetted by a whole lifetime of Marlboro Reds.
Very strange American man.
Here's a perfect example of the kind of, this is a shot that lasts for probably 10, 12 seconds. And the camera's just sitting there, and Peter has been in the scene and is responding to Rampai. Rampai plays Mr. Odie. And we take his head off and we put Brad's head on it. And, it had to really reside in that space. And it was one of the biggest tests of whether or not this whole thing was going to work. When we finally saw that camera just sitting there and Benjamin sort of biting his lip, not knowing how he's supposed to respond to this stranger, I really felt like facial capture stuff had finally gotten to a place where you could hang a character on it. This is one of my favorite cues in the whole movie, and I really felt like we were going to have to cut Mr. Odie, which was a problem in terms of the narrative, because he really helps establish Benjamin's curiosity, gets Benjamin out of the house. He's the first person to sort of knows that there's something else going on. He's not just this little old person. That there's something else that's happening, that's going on in it. And so when he takes him out and he takes him on the streetcar, this was a key thing that we didn't know whether or not it could ever pull its own weight, if it could ever really figure out a reason for it to exist in the movie. And then when we got the facial capture in here, I started to breathe a sigh of relief. But it was also Alexandre's cue here, which I love. It's like nothing else in the movie. It's this total breath of fresh air. It's this completely different influence. And it's just Mr. Odie's theme. It's this little kind of strutting moment of release.
You all alone?
Plenty of time will be alone.
There's some interesting kind of facial performance stuff with Benjamin in this scene, because it's so minimal. Benjamin across the movie is minimal in terms of what it is that he does, but that scene especially, he has just these little kind of like looks and gulps.
I think about the river I grew up on. It would be nice.
Whenever we would shoot a scene in exterior day, we had to well, in this period, we had to kind of get rid of the street. So we would bring in loads and loads of dirt and lay them down so that the roads looked like they were dirt, and then cars would drive through them and you'd have dust all over the place. It was pretty fantastic. And great thanks to the city of New Orleans for letting us do it. Certainly a lot of the daiquiri vendors in the area were not so happy. Apparently dust and daiquiris don't go together. This is one of my favorite head replacement shots right here. It was one of these things that it just never looked right until partially it was because of what Brad was doing with his face and how sort of extreme it was. But as soon as it was composited underneath that hat, and as soon as it had that sort of end of day ambient light in his glasses and stuff, you just went, wow, that looks like a thing. Looks like a real organism. Well, this is a perfect example of exactly how important it is to have great actors. We had shot 15 takes of Taraji washing his hands and being upset with him, and they were all great. And it turned out that the camera had a back focus problem. I could only shoot 2 more because she was kind of wasted. It was 2 a.m. or something, and so she did 2 more, and they were just as good as the first 15. And it was kind of, whew. But I mean, it's so embarrassing to have to come to an actor and say, it's really great what you did those last 15 takes, but it's all out of focus. I need you to do it one more time. Originally, there was a lot more Fawn, who plays Dorothy. We had a lot of these scenes going on between Julia and the hospice worker, and we ended up cutting that stuff way back. So it's just sort of hands coming into plump pillows, and she's always sort of racing through frame, and I never got a chance to apologize. This is one of those moments where you just go, I mean, we'd shot this tracking shot that walked through all these bodies and finally found Benjamin, and we were like, wow, I don't know if this is going to work. And when it finally went together and we had the sunlight hitting the side of his face, and it was kind of amazing. It was like, I think for the pieces that we need, we were able to solve all the problems that we needed to solve. But, I do think, in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll probably see something that, in terms of a character that is absolutely 1000% undeniably organic. The fabulous Elle Fanning. Anytime characters meet in a movie, it's always, especially this is such a fulcrum scene. It's the crux of their relationship. This is the scene that they come from, So we shot this scene 3 times. First time there was all the stuff where Benjamin tried to do a headstand, and the scene was just too long, and so we cut it back to this, and then we shot it, and we ended up having a different actress play the grandmother, and so we went back and restaged it, always trying to kind of get it down to its gist, the most important. But always, Elle Fanning was ready and and prepared and amazing. I mean, she has this amazing life in her little face. And we had to change the color of her eyes, so we had to go in and do that digitally. Her voice is actually provided by Kate Blanchett, who loops all of the materials for young Daisy, all the scenes, even Madison's, who's the next incarnation of Daisy. This is one of those moments right here where you have a decision to make. Are you going to play a big realization between 2 characters that one of them has let the other one down, or are you going to... And I just loved how Taraji handled this notion. She looks across the room and she realizes, oh, I probably should have told Benjamin first, but it's so understated, and I like understatement. I love this reveal of Benjamin listening to them as they're reading the book. And it smiled, little Brad smiles so wonderful as he waits for her to get back into the story.
I promise.
This is one of my favorite head replacement shots because of what Brad's doing when he wakes up, when she nudges him awake, and then he sits up in bed, and you really get this feeling like he just can't see her until he has those glasses on, and then he's like, and I'm not even really awake. I can't see you, and I'm not really cognizant of what's going on right now. Then they come downstairs. I love this little moment. I love the idea of, the fort where the kids play. The kids go to the fort. Some people take umbrage with the notion that an 80-year-old man should be underneath sheets with a 7-year-old girl. And my response is, That's the fucking point of the scene.
I'll tell you a secret if you'll tell me one.
Okay.
I saw my mom.
Again, a little Eric Rothism. I love the fact that the first thing that she reveals of herself, this first secret that she tells, is about how there's problems in the there's problems in their household. There's things that she knows, secrets that she has of, that the parents are somehow not connected in some way. There's somebody that's come between them. I thought it was such a kind of odd way to start a scene, and I love the fact that nothing ever gets said about it again. It doesn't get picked up.
Maybe not.
I love Brad's performance in this. I just think, for somebody who's, having to act through, all these layers of technology, it's like, it's him. The actress who plays the grandmother, Phyllis Somerville, when she came in to do this scene, she was almost too understanding at the beginning. I had to push her to, no, really, I mean, you are shocked and horrified that this is going on. And finally, we sort of got her to this pitch, and and she was really pissed off. She spent the rest of the day kind of pissed off at Robert Towers, who plays Benjamin at this point. When Benjamin's on a single cane, he's played by Robert Towers. And so by the end of the day, she was just kind of angry at Robert, and they kind of couldn't be around each other because she took on this whole like being mortified of the octogenarian and the 7-year-old.
People aren't gonna understand just how different you are.
I love this scene. I love what Taraji brought to this moment of faith. God hasn't said yet, because I didn't really resonate with me when I read the script. I didn't really sort of understand how confused she was by faith and how it related to Benjamin and his predicament. And she does this thing at the end where she scratches her head, and then she sort of turns and she's tried to sort of make it all okay, but you get this idea that she just does not know what to do with this kid anymore, or whether he is a kid. So we added this little thing with Ted Manson. Whenever he sort of starts, he does this like throat clearing that kind of gets everybody's attention as he sort of launches into this memory. He's so kind of comfortable with the injustice of, God sort of choosing him out of all the possibilities. This is the guy who's going to be struck by lightning 7 times. When we were shooting young Mr. Dawes being hit by lightning in these different places, the actor who played him, Clay, he kept asking, so what happens? And I said, I don't know. I mean, just like 500,000 volts of electricity just rip through your body. And he goes, well, do I fall over on my side? I said, you just fly up in the air. And by the end of the day, he was done being struck by lightning. We actually had one. There's 7 that he talks about in the film, and we had one that we didn't show. And no, it's not available as an Easter egg.
Not many people experience that. Want me to go on? Supposed to see something else.
And again, this is something that I love about Eric, is that when Queenie has her baby, she sort of moves on, and that becomes the thing that she mothers. And it's not that Benjamin is forgotten. It's just that things change. The relationships between people change. And this is, something that a lot of people have problems with in this movie, because they look at it and they go, well, I don't know, she's so mean. But you just go, that's how he felt about what happened. He felt he had been replaced, and certainly as a baby he had been replaced.
I haven't figured that out yet, but I'll send you a...
Again, this is another one of the things I like about visual effects, is doing the head replacement where you just have an edge light on a character and you're just seeing his bald head and 6 or 7 hairs, and this lens flare that kind of cuts across his face from this open-faced light bulb in the background. And it made it seem more realistic than, normal special effects shots where you try to get everything to be so kind of perfect and clean. I love Rampai's exit, his silhouette with his little walking stick and his hat and his bag.
Spent a lot of time by myself that year.
This is one of my favorite effect shots. Just I love what happens with his cheek and how it's magnified through his eyeglasses. And of course, when we shot it, we didn't have eyeglasses on Robert, so we didn't even know that that's what it was going to look like. And then when it came up in dailies, and you see his little cheeks puffing out like Louis Armstrong as he's shooting his little lead soldiers.
Well, all right, as long as she's
And here's an example, in these 3 shots, you're going to see, Benjamin's head replaced as he's walking out of frame, walks into a doorway. Benjamin's head replaced as he's petting the dog as we pan off him. And again, do you need to do those effect shots? But that's what makes him, to me, feel real, like he's a real person in these scenes, because you throw him away. He's there and he's doing what Benjamin would do, but it's not like it's always framed and supported as a big money shot.
She taught me to play the piano.
Edith, who played Mrs. Maple, and again, you never really know what Mrs. Maple's name is, but it's Mrs. Maple. That's who she is in the script. She teaches him to play piano, and we had all these different doubles to actually do the playing. And, everybody did, Brad did his best to learn his part, and, we did makeup on his hands and all these things, but we ended up bringing people in for the last 2 or 3 days of shooting. We had, literally like 12 or 15 hand doubles come in and play all the piano parts, because we had the movie cut by then. But Edith was an amazing sport, and she has this amazing skin, and her skin became sort of the model for, Benjamin's skin has to be at least this good, has to look like Edith Ivy's. This is the scene that Eric Barba almost quit on, but I just kept saying to him, you got to figure out a way. I can't shy away from him without a shirt on. It was in the script, Eric. Some people don't like the idea that this hurricane takes place during Katrina, and again, it's not intended to be an inordinately important beat, but it's just, kind of talking about change and, the old city and the new city, and time before a very defining, chaotic moment in city history.
My father waited 4 hours for my brother to get here from Bossier City.
There's a great little moment here where Sonia closes the clipboard that she has, and you see this little sticker that says DNR, which of course means do not resuscitate. And I thought that was a great little extra that kind of shows you exactly what's going on in this room.
Queenie would let me go.
And we launch into another little moment with the fabulous Ted Manson as he gets to talk about his next escapade with electricity.
Did I ever tell you I was struck by lightning 7 times? Once when I was in the field just tending to my cows.
I wanted to get all the cows to scatter, but you can't shoot 11 takes with the cows scattering. You can get them to scatter once, but they probably won't trust you enough to come back for take 2.
Walk around here.
And finally, the fabulous Jared Harris, who I had seen in one of the Oceans movies. He was a record producer with Don Cheadle, and I think it was the second one. And I thought he was very funny in that. And I'd seen him in one other thing. I don't remember what it was, but again, Lorraine said, well, what about Jared Harris? I said, that's fantastic. Perfect. Bring him in. And I honestly don't think we saw anybody else. We just said, wow, if we can get Jared Harris, we'll be done.
I was as happy as I could be. I would do anything.
All of the boats on the water, we had to do CG because we had very, very strict over budget penalties. And I wanted to honor. I'd given them my word that we were going to make this movie for the amount that we told them. And I didn't want to come back and say, hey, we're going to need another 5 weeks to go out and shoot on the water. Enough people have made that mistake.
Where? You,
I think this scene, they really got the skin right on Benjamin. It really seems to me like he matches very well to Jared.
I guess.
In the first draft of the script, there were a number of scenes that Eric had written where Benjamin masturbates. And as amusing as they were, it seems like their inclusion was nearly chronic. So I had to excise a few of them. And instead he wrote this kind of wonderful introduction to taking the 70-year-old teenager, tweener, out for his first kind of sexual escapade and drinking. And again, I think, the thing that for me was interesting was this constant sort of dramatic irony that that you're seeing a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, and of course everyone else is treating him like he's just the saddest 72-year-old they've ever seen. This is one of those scenes where when people tell me, wow, that scene where at the bar where they're talking about the issues that one has with one's father, that's when you've got somebody who hasn't been raised well on your hands. It's always it's one of those litmus. But, again, taking into account where Jared comes from, there was a lot of interesting stuff to mine.
Don't want to spend the rest of your life on a tugboat.
Absolutely. That right? Do you know what my father said to me? He said, "Who the hell do you think you are?"
I love the idea that, Jared has this character who's talking about the exact opposite situation that he had in his life, where he evidently wanted to do the same thing that his father did. Brad came up with the idea that when Jared says he laughed at me, that we would cut back and Brad, or that Benjamin would be right in the middle of laughing, and that he would then look guiltily as though he thought it was supposed to be funny, but now he realizes that it indeed is not. The notion of somebody tattooing themselves was such an absurd one, and we tried to make it as realistic as we could, but obviously I don't know how one does one's elbow or a playing card on one's clavicle. I guess you do it in a mirror. But he's pretty good, I gotta say, Captain Mike.
Captain Mike, we're ready for you. Your turn.
No, yes, sir.
I love the idea of a guy who's so comfortable he can kind of walk around with his pants at his ankles, like saying hello to everyone. There's a much longer scene scripted, and we shot the pieces of it where Benjamin and the prostitute go through she hands him a washcloth, and she's expecting him to wash his nether regions, and of course he washes his face and misunderstands everything. It was a very funny sequence, but it was probably $200,000 with a head replacement, and it went by the wayside. But Yasmin did a great job. But I do like the idea of this guy. He may have a 70-year-old body, but he's got the will and desire of a 15-year-old. It's a tricky thing, the reintroduction of Benjamin's father. So Jason and I would constantly, between takes, I would come up to him and I would say, it's a little too Terry Thomas. It needs to have a little less Terry Thomas in it. But that Benjamin will be recognizable to the audience. You don't know whether or not they're going to buy. They'd be recognizable to his father, but there has to be this little thought, that little moment. I felt like he managed to really do it in a very nice, subtle way, that we get the idea of that he's recognized him and that he's taken this in and he doesn't know what to do next. He's a very facile actor, and he spent so much of his career under a foot and a half of prosthetic silicone that when you finally kind of get to see him, he's such a great face. This was a scene that just, no matter what we did, we just could not get the Brad performance to translate to what Robert was doing with the body. And so there was a lot of tweaking with keyframe animation to make sure, because Robert has a tendency he has a lot of training as a mime, and his physical presence is very specific. All the things that he did were very specific, but he also has these sort of odd little head movements that he does that just didn't translate to what Brad was doing with his face. So there were things that we had to do. We'd go in and sort of take out movement in the background plates.
What kind of disease? I was born old. Sorry. No need to be. There's nothing wrong with old age.
Robert's hands, he's in his late 60s, early 70s, but he's in amazing shape, and his hands are actually kind of pretty perfect. So Lola kind of went in and gave him arthritic knuckles. And we used these photographs of Keith Richards' hands. Said, make them look like this. I don't think Keith Richards has arthritis, but I just think it's the miles.
Buttons. Buttons. There isn't a button that we don't make. Our biggest competition is B.F. Goodrich and his infernal zippers.
Would you gentlemen like anything else?
One for the road, Benjamin?
Only if you let me pay for it.
So, what line of work do you do?
This is one of the hardest shots ever. I'm a tugboat man to get that smile and the sense of pride, because the mouth shape that Brad has at 45 is very different from the mouth shape that was created for this 70-year-old Benjamin. The corners of his mouth come down and he has more of a Muppet mouth. And Brad's mouth naturally sort of goes up at the corners. He has a slight smile just in the way his mouth is naturally shaped. So to get that smile and to get the drunkenness of it and to get just took forever. It was one of those things that it was so, it looked like a person. It just didn't look like Benjamin because it just didn't have enough Brad Pitt in it. And a lot of refinements that were made to the, facial capture stuff by hand was you could take it, you could retarget it and reapply that facial performance capture. But there was something about Brad that was lost in it. And so in order to make it Benjamin, we had to go back in and make it more Brad-like.
I love those weekends when she comes and spend the night with her grandmother.
Again, you just see his chin here, which we had to put in, just his chin at the top of the frame. And this is Madison. Madison plays Daisy when she's in her teens or her tweens. And again, she's looped by Kate. And I love how sort of competitive she is. She manages to make it sweet. I can do anything you can do. This is a matte painting that Digital Domain did. We only had one boat, so we had to put the other boat in. And we added the wires and took out all the cars that were driving on the bridge. That bridge actually is not period. It wouldn't appear for another 30 years or something, but it's a movie. I always wanted this idea that we see Captain Mike, we don't really know if he's not dead. And then he finally sort of moves. He finally breathes like he has sleep apnea or something. I love that head shake because it's just so matter of fact.
You're drunk every night.
So the good.
Close friend. I'm sure the river.
Again, this was shot on a blue screen stage, and we had the whole set on a little gimbal, so the whole thing moved around, and then the camera operator would sort of tweak the camera back and forth so that you could still get that sort of sense of, movement against the light. But it's very, very subtle. Here's an example of, we were shooting on a blue screen stage, and I wanted to fog it in. I wanted to bring in all this smoke and smoke the stage up. And the visual effects supervisor from Digital Domain, they were originally going to do the sequence, and they ended up not doing it, not because we added all the smoke, but I just said, we're doing it with smoke. And they said, well, we can't matte the stuff. And I said, well, you don't really need to matte it that much. It's like, it'll fill it with smoke, and we'll just tweak the color out of the blue screen. But the interesting thing was just how soft the light is when you fill a stage with smoke. It's just, you can't fake that, even no matter how many silks you put it through. It's like when the diffusion is actually in the air around the people, it just makes a completely different sense of the reality of it. So the hospital set was built on a soundstage at Paramount, and we had blue screen out the windows. And Olin ended up doing hundreds of shots of matting this 3D background out there that was just basically buildings in the rain and the fog. And they also did this beautiful water rushing against the window. It was so many shots. We had weeks and weeks and weeks of dailies of, like, here's a shot with a little bit of water in the corner. And we were able to make it what we wanted it to be, but next time it'll be a translate. So this is another one of those sequences where you look at it and you go, well, this will be easy. We'll just put him in a chair and we'll shoot him in the mirror. But the weird thing was that people didn't understand that we were looking into a mirror. Brad's face looks completely different in a mirror. When you flop his face, it looks different than you know it. And when you caricature it and do the old age sculpture of it, and all of a sudden you don't recognize him, it's such a weird thing. And we realized as we were going through, something's wrong. His face doesn't look right. His face doesn't look right. And then we would flip the shot and look at it in dailies, and all of a sudden he looked fine. We ended up putting a lot of ripple and the peeling silver off the corners of the mirror so that people understood that they were looking into a mirror and they weren't looking through a doorway. So the dog in the movie, her name is Lacey. She's very sweet. She's very old. I mean, the joke is that you bring this dog in who's on its last legs, and of course it's going to survive everyone in the old folks' home. And this is the one scene where we got Lacey to do exactly what we wanted, which is stay there, Lacey, and then leave with Robert. And I guess that's about all you can ask for a dog that's, I guess, the equivalent of like 108 for me. She did well for an 108-year-old.
Buried in Nottingham. In 1936, when I was coming to the end of the 17th year of my life, I packed my bag.
So now we've made another transition, and in terms of the bodies, this is now Tom Everett playing Benjamin. And so this was his first day. He showed up in New Orleans, and we had cast him on videotape for, not so specifically for his body type as much as he's very relaxed in the way that he moves. Brad, his movements are very specific. He's very economical in the way that he moves. And Tom had that. He had this, all we needed him to do was pick up some luggage and walk down the steps and then walk down the street. And there was something about, it seemed kind of, I don't know. I just love the way he walks in this scene. I love the way he carries he goes out into the world. And Tom came in and did this scene and some of the stuff on the tugboat. But, it's the weird thing of like having all these different people playing the bodies, and yet the one consistent thing throughout it is going to be the face, which you're going to add later.
From everywhere. Write me a postcard from everywhere.
This is a great cut that Kirk Baxter came up with, which was to go from Benjamin walking off down the street in this booming down shot as he goes off into the world, and then going to the cigar box. Originally, there was a scene where she goes and she gets the cigar box, and and he just said, boom, just cut the two things together, and it was a beautiful idea. I love the disdain that Kate has for that Captain Mike. Somebody that she never really met him, but I mean, just that once, but there's something about him that was, I love the way it just sounds like she just always thought he was a bad influence. You have sequences in movies where you have the crew of the boat or the kind of gaggle of miscreants and malcontents, and they have to make an impression, but you're not going to spend a lot of time. There was a couple of other scenes that were written and shot, and we ended up taking them out of the movie because it made things dangle a little bit too long. So Don Creech is the cook, and he's our little homage to Delicatessen. Josh and Christopher play the Brody twins, our actual twins, who are absolutely identical. Yeah, and I do think that they fuck with you. I think that they actually show up on certain days wearing the other one's wardrobe, just to torture you. There in the corner of the frame is Richmond Arquette. He's the doctor in Fight Club. He's the delivery man in Seven. He delivers the head in the box. And then Josh Stewart, who came in and agreed to play this little part of the guy who never says anything except one line. And at one point I tried to give him another line, and he said, no, I'm doing this because I only have one line. And I was like, okay. This is a sequence that we never thought was going to work, that we would ever get the head replacement right for Kate, but we just sort of crossed our fingers. And the guys at Hydraulics, the brothers Strauss, who figured out how to take the photogrammetry of Kate Blanchett and put it on Jessica's body. They did an amazing job. Originally, there were a couple of scenes in the movie where we tried to, in some kind of offhanded way, explain. We had a scene where Benjamin went to the doctor, and the doctor gave him a physical, and that seemed kind of boring. And then at the last minute, we wanted to have an introduction where Brad could finally turn around, and it could be Brad in the movie. We could see him as the age he's supposed to be. And Eric wrote this scene where he says, either I drink a lot more than I think I do, or you, Brad, or what's your secret? And we couldn't kind of come up with, it always ended up being coy if he dodge the question there. And then as we were shooting it, we shot like 15 takes of whatever the original line was. And I just came up to him and just said, just tell him, you do drink a lot. You should look into that kind of thing. And Brad cracked up, and he and he delivered in such a sweet way, it's such a great deflection, because there's no real explanation. It's not The Exorcist. We don't want to have an MRI scene. After we did the read through of the movie, Jared was wonderful and funny, and probably not much different from what he's doing in the movie, but he sort of felt like he had lost his way, and we were doing the wardrobe, and he kind of didn't understand what, he knew what the character looked like, but he was kind of lost. And he came to me and he said, I'm not really sure what you want. And I said, dude, Jared, he's John Belushi. He's the guy who should end up face down in a puddle of vomit and then wake up, bound up, wipe his hands on his knees and go to work. He was like, okay. And from that moment on, he was just this guy. Okay, I'm going to tell the story because I think it talks about what real collaboration is, which is when somebody challenges you to make you better. And I had originally an idea for who would play Elizabeth Abbott, and it was not Tilda Swinton. And only because Tilda Swinton didn't occur to me. And I had this actress, and I kept saying to Brad, this is the woman we should get. And he said, I don't know. And it went on for weeks. And finally, he said, I got to be honest with you, I think there's better. So I said, okay, that's fine. If there is somebody better, then it should be obvious. And you should be able to figure out who this better person is in 5 minutes or less. So I'll be in my office. In 5 minutes, I'm going to call and I'm going to hire this other actress. And if you have the inclination to come up with this other name, call me back and let me know who it is. Otherwise, I'm going to... And he said, okay. So he hung up the phone. And 3.5 minutes later, phone rings. I pick it up and he says, Tilda Swinton. And I said, okay, that's better. Let's get Tilda Swinton. And she came in and, Tilda is so beautiful that it's kind of disarming. People who are that amazing to look at usually aren't a lot of fun. And Tilda Swinton is so much fucking fun. It's just hilarious. She's so fearless. She has no preconceived notions. She comes in having charted what it is that she needs, the things that she needs to do. And she'll have ideas about where the humanity lies in a given moment or in a given collection of moments. But she's also completely willing to, I worry about her in a movie that would have a lot of stunts, because I think she would probably be the first person to try setting themselves on fire just to see what it would be like to act through Zeljo. We always joke that, the character in the television show of the Beverly Hillbillies, Miss Hathaway, we always refer to Elizabeth Abbott as Miss Hathaway. They just came in and had their lines and just did this scene. We probably shot it 40 different times with all the different coverage, maybe more than that, over an entire day. And it was fun to watch every take. I don't know what Eric's sort of obsession is with Southern characters and or English characters, but he does love them, and he loves to write them. Now, you're a seaman. Such a great conversation starter. This was one of those things where I thought, okay, they have to make tea, and then there has to be honey with flies in it, and then he has to walk across the room, and I was like, oh my God, all these fucking props and, processes that have to happen in order for this. It has to happen in the, below the frame. You're not really even seeing what's going on, but they have to constantly do it, and it has to match. Man, it was like Pirates of the Caribbean. It's like 9 shows a week and 2 on Sundays. They were just perfect. Everything that, everything matched. And then within that, so many different little flourishes. I think that actors don't get enough chance to play. Certainly, it's an odd tangential moment in a narrative that's supposedly about something else. It's an important scene for me because she introduces the notion of regret. And that was one of the things that Eric and I talked about a lot. We were talking about what are Benjamin's regrets? And Ross said to me, I don't know that he has any. And I said, well, then we're not making a movie about life, because, you can't make a movie about life and not talk about regret. And so that really framed Elizabeth's essence, what she was essentially providing the movie. You were talking about an odd character in Benjamin because he has no backstory. You're literally with him. You're on his shoulder subjectively at almost every kind of critical moment in his life. First love, first drink, first vomit, first time he has a sister, all of his little heartbreaks. So you have to sort of experience the movie in a different way than you do most movies. And now all of a sudden you bring into the narrative this character who's going to kind of be a pit stop in a weird way. His first love. And she's sad. She's an alcoholic. And she has a lot of these things that she's sublimated. And he brings her out of that a little bit. And she certainly brings him out of his shell. Although, the cumulative effect of her influence on him should drive him to war. He should, I like to describe it as he finds femininity again. He finds this woman and she sort of drives him onto the boat and to war, to the world without women. And that's when he experiences a different kind of death, the death that's very different from the death that he's experienced his whole life. And it's very tragic and violent and awful. And that's what sends him back home. So the script contained this sequence, this montage that I know that Eric Roth does this. I'm sure that he wakes in the middle of the night and thinks about his family. And I totally relate to this idea that somehow when everyone's in their bed, everything's okay. The only bad stuff can happen tomorrow. And so this moment of respite. And I thought it was beautifully described in the script. And it was one of these things where you kind of go, well, I'm going to have to shoot this montage. It's got to fit these words and evoke this idea, and I'm not so sure it'll be good enough. But we in the schedule you have to kind of, all right, we got to do the mouse running, and we got to do the curtain blowing, and we got to do the sink dripping, and we got to do and so sort of fit in this at the end of whatever shoot day. So it always becomes this sort of little afterthought. And yet when you string them together and you put this music over it and you have this voice, all of a sudden it elevates these little inserts. And that's my favorite thing about film, is when you finally see something in its context and it has all the elements supporting it, and it does transcend somebody with a headset on saying, okay, mouse running, take 3. Originally this scene was later. It was after we discovered that they'd fallen in love. And Kirk moved this, and I thought it was a nice idea because she had sort of made an impression on him, and then we jumped into the future and saw this moment from the past where she received this postcard and how it sort of affected her. I always liken this when Benjamin leaves as this kind of member of the wedding moment where she's hurt by it, but she doesn't really know why. And it's kind of in this scene when she's a dancer finally that she begins to understand. She has a different sort of sense of ownership about Benjamin and his relationships. And especially that it's played itself out in this rehearsal. So we go from this pained moment to this physical expression of loss or sadness. Benjamin coming down the stairs and finding Elizabeth dressed to the nines. I love the look on Brad's face when at first there's this smile of like total appreciation. My goodness, I'm so touched that you, and then of course his, oh God, I look so ratty, and here I am in my favorite robe looking like the rube who normally comes down and makes tea. It was funny in the 2 shots in the wide shots. We were playing around with the tone of it, and Tilda kept sort of having second thoughts about launching into this story about when she was a teenager and she wanted to swim the English Channel. And finally, by the time we got into the over the shoulders, this thing just came together. You don't know whether it's something that's been on her mind and she's wanted to discuss it with somebody for a long time, but she just, it's kind of like she lets him in this odd way. You see her measuring him before this, as she's teaching him how to enjoy caviar, this slightly lascivious text. And she came up with this thing that you've never had caviar, which I thought was it wasn't in the script originally. I like the fact that he's trying to sort of appear like, oh yeah, we could do it this way. We could enjoy caviar this way. And she's like, no. You've never done this. And then she launches into this story. And the turn that she took, the little slide into sadness, regret, it's so priceless. I remember watching on the monitor on the set and just going, wow, that's what it is to be that good. And we shot this stuff in the tank at Paramount. It was funny because the tank at Paramount is now, for practical reasons, is a parking lot. So they really don't like to rent it out as a tank because it's a pain in everybody's ass, because you have to have all the people from maintenance and accounting and obfuscation and all the different departments. They all have to move their cars to a different place. But we got to fill the tank at Paramount and bring in the wind machines and light it all up, and it's just amazing. The swimmer who plays young Elizabeth Abbott, Taryn, was somebody that Lorraine found, and she looks just like Tilda Swinton. We were like, this is uncanny. Of course, she has a latex hat and rubber goggles on, so we probably could have gone away with anything. But then you get to the beach scene and you see her, and you can truly appreciate how much this 20-year-old looks like Tilda. It was perfect casting. We shot the scene on the beach, actually at Lake Pontchartrain, and we rolled like 4 takes of it with the guys walking by with the flares, and it looked great. We were so happy with it. We came back and we cut it into the thing, and it looked totally fake. It just looked like a painted backing. You go there and you wait for the sun to get right, and it's just blood red stripe at the horizon, and it looks absolutely 100% like a transite. Originally, there was a scene where they kissed earlier, and that line, this was the first time a woman had ever kissed me, happened in that scene that took place in the bar. And we cut that scene, and this was actually their second kiss, but then we put the voiceover over it, and he throws the napkin down. It was it's kind of perfect. The first time a woman ever kissed me. This is CG snow, and the degree of difficulty, what hydraulics went through to add, these snowflakes that hit his coat and hit her coat and then dissolve. I commend them. It was, and it's a close to 2-minute shot. Or all the snow, had a roto behind the people. And when we shot this in Montreal, and we had brought in tons and tons of ice, and then of course put it through a wood chipper and blew it all over the streets. And of course, the antithesis of New Orleans, where it never drops below 45 or 50 in the winter. We were told that this was in spring, and that the nights would never be over like 45 or 50 degrees. And of course, we got there and it was about 78 degrees that night. And I had my chair, it was right next to a drain, and I just watched, half a ton of ice melt and just pour down. As we were shooting, we were just listening to the snow in the street just melt away. This hat was the bane of my existence. I had so much respect for Jackie West that I went with it, but I hated it because to me it was like Big Bird or something. It was like it had its own kind of character, but it does work in that shot right there. And it was one of those things where we lit the scene, we had a stand-in, we had the camera set up, we had the whole thing, and then Tilda came in, and you just went, wow, it was worth all the bullshit to have this one shot. You have characters that mean a lot to you. Elizabeth Abbott's husband was an important figure in the story, and yet it ends up being somebody who's cast on videotape sort of at the last minute. And David Patterson came in and he put himself on tape, and we loved the way that he looked, and he came in to play this part, and he was perfectly willing to just be more mysterious, or try one where that he's having an affair with your wife, try one where you have no idea. He gave us so many great little moments to play with.
Saw each other every night.
I love this wig on Brad. I was very worried about the merchant seaman part of his life, that he would, that it would look too kind of staid. And there was a crazy wig that was lying around that Natasha and Greg threw on him at one point when we were doing makeup tests, and it was all kind of greasy and everything, and he looks a little like sort of a crazed Barry Levinson, but we decided to go that route.
Until one night.
This is one of those scenes where we originally shot, he walks down the stairs, he stops, he looks, he walks around, everywhere he goes, he walks in and he walks out, and all these things are a little bit more labored, and, the moments are so much longer, and when we first assembled it, that's the way it should be. And then Kirk took it and sort of reinvented it as this just, you see a second and a half of this, you see 2 seconds of that, you see a second and a half of this, and then you stretch time with the dissolves, and we see him sleeping. The dissolves of him sleeping are a little homage to Seven, but mostly because I just couldn't figure out a way to tell the story again. So I was like, well, we could do that old trick.
To me, policy means in your future, possibly beyond. We've been trying to plan that. As you may or may not know, the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor yesterday. Frank D. Roosevelt asked each of us to do our part.
I love these guys. I love there's no rah like we've got to go and we've got to fight the fascists, and we have to. It's kind of like they've just been rerouted. You're no longer dragging this crap around, you're dragging other crap. And I like how, sort of the younger guys are a little bit more gung-ho, and then of course you have John Grimm, who of course just looks at this as, well, this is how I'll die. This is, the Eeyore. Oh great, more bad news. Here's this reiteration of this notion of people who are married but have these very separate lives. When Prentice May says, I'd like to see my wife one more time, you get this idea that they've been dealing with some sort of illness, chronic or terminal illness that she has, and he's been off making a living, and he now gets an option to bow out of the Second World War, and he says, I think I'm going to head home and see my wife one last time. And I love those little notions, and they're very Eric Roth.
She had left a note. She wrote, "It was nice to have met you." And that was it. It wasn't the war any of us expected.
This was a scene that was shot that didn't have a ship in the background, and we were trying to figure out a way to sort of insinuate that they're towing something. And so we just put the bow of the ship and had a little bit of light behind the bowsprit on it. You just barely see it. And Dennis Smith, the Cherokee, there was a much longer kind of sequence with Dennis, but we ended up trimming it back down to this. But I love the idea of the most gung-ho guy on the boat is the guy who's been totally fucked over by America.
Glad to act according to their conduct. Chief, dying, would you, Chief?
And again, here's Josh Stewart protecting the one scene where he says something. It was a good call. Originally we had him, I was going to give him one other little line, and then he said, no, save it for this. And I love this idea of somebody saying, I've been watching you. You seem trustworthy. Can't say that about a lot of people. I do think you can say about Benjamin, though.
Giving me all of his pay.
Love that shot. That's my favorite shot in the movie is the light coming down the stairs and you see him handing this wad of single dollar bills. This sequence was a total pain in the ass because you just had no sense on the set of being on water in the middle of the night. So the actors had to make it all up. Everything that you see playing on their faces is the quality of their imaginations because, they're just on this giant soundstage surrounded by blue screen curtains.
Come on, that light.
Transport.
One of the notions that we had in terms of the technology of how to present this scene was we had the boat on a gimbal. We could move the boat so it could be tossed by, waves. The notion here is that they're in the North Atlantic and it's like glass. And this would be glass for the North Atlantic. But for the most part, we shot the boat itself rolling and being tossed on the gimbal, and we shot it off a techno crane so that the crane would be a static position. It would be, with regards to roll and pitch and yaw, it would be level. And so the boat itself would give you all this movement in it. And it's kind of an interesting subliminal thing because it is going on all the time. There's always just a little bit of movement. It probably could have been more exaggerated, but you don't want it to be tossing them about so much that you got nowhere to go when he puts the throttle down.
Them fuckers. Man! Thank you, Pete. What?
It seemed to me the movie was very classic, that we wanted to do something that was just presenting, here's what happened to this guy in his life. And we could have made it very active and actiony and exciting, but to me it's not about the exciting. It's so mundane. The deaths of these guys is so much about being in the wrong place at the wrong time and having kind of nothing really actiony to do. I mean, really what Captain Mike does is just go, our only weapon is ourselves, and we've got to kamikaze ourselves into this submarine, and that's really our only, because if they torpedo us, we're gone. This was all CG, not because we wouldn't have wanted to have done it with miniatures, but mostly with miniatures you end up redoing it in CG anyway, so. I hate doing wet work. I can't stand having, makeup artists with pumps to pump blood out of wounds and stuff. So I just put black tape, big dots of black tape on Jared's chest. And then we turned it over to Asylum and said, you make giant sucking 50 caliber wounds in his chest and have blood pour out of it. And I have no idea how they did it, but when we saw it in dailies, we were like, well, that's so much better than cleaning somebody up after every take and having to refill the little blood syringes and do all that stuff. I will never use squibs ever in my life ever again. And they also made his carotid artery freeze, which was fantastic. And again, this was a last-minute idea for a shot with a sinking boat. We had to put the hinges on the other side of the door in order to get the door to work, and so it's a massive cheat. But again, it's a movie. There are people who, go through movies and look for inconsistencies and continuity errors, and they list them. And I fear those people, and I also weep for them.
He was going to die there. I sent Pleasant Curtis's wife his money. I said goodbye to the twin, Big Brody, and to Mike Clark, captain of the tugboat, Chelsea. I said goodbye to all the other men who had dreams of their own. All the men who wanted to be insurance.
The Hummingbird, aside from a current wisdom that it is Eric Roth's inability to see past his previous works and is looking for another way to include a feather in his movie. It's the antithesis of the feather. It has a intelligence of its own. It shows up as a symbol at a specific time of not of the sort of chaotic whim of the world, of events or fate, but as a symbol of the eternity, the endless loop. And so it has a very specific reason to be there. And so I take umbrage with people's equating it to a feather.
Queenie?
This was a scene that I think was the first time Brad was ever with Taraji. This may, I don't know if this is the scene where he said, my mom's hot. Because she was in her chubby suit with her special extra chins that we added onto her. But I was really worried about the scene. I really thought it was kind of I hate sentiment, and I certainly hate it when people are happy in movies. But the first time we rolled a take on this, Taraji was so lively and so just filled. I mean, that squeal that she does, which is so real. I mean, everybody just kind of like, you had a big smile on your face. You couldn't help yourself. Until the studio saw this performance, everybody kept saying to me, why is she so mean to him? She's so mean. She's such a mean person. And I was like, that's what I think a parent should be. I think she should be busy and caring and set limits. And then they saw this scene and everybody was happy with who Queenie was. This scene, we shot the exterior part where he walks up to the house first. And then by the time we got into it, his makeup had gotten very dried and kind of cakey. And so we had to do a lot of little digital fixes on the hairline, the wig line, and the corners of his mouth. The woman who was the extra in the scene, she was so sweet. And we kind of snatched her. There was a group of like 10 or 12 extras that day. And I said, I would love if this woman would do it. And Bob went over to her and asked her if she would play the nodding woman in the next scene. And she said, yes, of course she would. And then we shot the wide shot over her shoulder and she did her nodding and everything was fine. And then we turned around to do a close-up. And the camera was probably 1.5 feet from her face and she had to do her nodding again. And she said, excuse me for a moment. And she got up, she went outside and she threw up. And she came back and she sat down and I thought, it is true. It's like people don't realize just what it takes to be under that kind of scrutiny. Very sweet. And then Ted Manson. I love this one. I love the idea of somebody actually operating a motor vehicle when they get struck by lightning and their hat flies off. And you can't see it here. We did have his yellow Labrador sitting in the seat next to him, and we had flash paper on the dashboard, so it all sparked, and this giant cloud of smoke came up, and the dog was just terrified. My first day of shooting with Cate Blanchett, even from the 3rd floor. She's just so unbelievably photogenic, it's freakish. So we put the red wig on her, the red wig, which was always frizzy because it was Louisiana, and apparently no one can prepare for that. So there's the dog that never dies, and I always love that idea that there's this dog that was going to outlive everyone. But you can see the flyaways on her wig drove me up a tree. I knew that we were going to have to do a little bit of retouching on her face. And what we really ended up doing mostly was to take the shadow out from under her cheekbone because her face is so sculpted. Her cheekbones are so pronounced. It's so exquisite. And we ended up just giving her mostly baby face. Just to make her look 20, 22. But the wig, the flyaways on the left side, that's just... I was literally beside myself. And that's like the back of her hair just drives me fucking crazy. And for the most part, we had these photographs of Andrew Wyeth. His face is very weathered and brown. And we wanted that look for Benjamin. And oddly enough, he kind of came to set often looking like an Oompa Loompa. He was bright orange. So we had to go in and color correction and change the face. I love that sweet moment between Julia and Cate. We turned to Hope Parrish, who's the prop master, and just said, she's got to have some kind of junky food, something she bought at a vending machine. And she goes, well, I have to find something in 5 minutes, and it has to be something that's cleared through legal. And I said, yeah. She went out to her truck. She brought back this Jell-O that's probably 25 years old. I told Julia to tell us if it tasted funny. She wouldn't have to eat it, but she said it was fine. This scene begins to talk a little bit about the notion of fate. And I've always maintained, and there are people who feel differently, that the movie is not about how two people who are made for each other. It's about two people who loved each other and then made a commitment to one another and then sort of lived up to that internal, maybe not never even voiced commitment to one another. But from the first time they meet on the lawn, and he's 80 and she's 7, it was never my intention that this should be, here are two people who are made for one another. It should be that here's someone who sparks an interest in another person, and then they continue to kind of parallel one another throughout life. This story, the Kipling story, we could never get a clear definition of what the pronunciation of any of the characters in it. God, Kong, Konongkwang. It's like, so it ended up being this running joke that nobody ever pronounces it the same way twice. We had this street corner in the French Quarter, and we did this Raging Bull, like, drive up in the 40s cab, but it just wasn't sort of romantic enough. The city itself didn't look kind of lit up enough. And so Matt World Digital took both sides of the street and really did wonders, made this beautiful sort of magic night with all these lights. Here's the red dress that Jackie and Kate love so much. I'm against red in movies as a color because I think it's often overused. It tends to be distracting. It's oftentimes, if it's used for distraction, it's fine. But it was a beautiful gown, and it looked fantastic on her, and it was so the period, and they came and they were like, you know, two excited little 11-year-olds. What do you think of the dress? What do you think of the dress? I was like, it's fine. They were like, that's great, because that's all we've ever planned on. We have nothing else to show you. And I said, all right, that's fine. And, you know, it's not the dress, it's how it's worn. And it's who wears it.
I didn't know you smoked.
I'm old enough. I'm old enough for a lot of things.
In New York, we stayed up all night. Watched the sun come up over the warehouses. There's always something to do.
I refer to this as the I am 16 going on 17, but originally this gazebo was supposed to be on the property at the house, at the old folks' home, and we just didn't have enough room to build it and to make sense of it. So we went, and this is Audubon Park, I think. There was this amazing exterior gazebo, and it was right next to this little inlet of water. And so Claudia Miranda and I talked about how we would light this. And we decided we would just put a little bit of smoke, a little Thule fog coming off the swamp in the back, which of course ended up being the most unbelievable clusterfuck for continuity. And a lot of times there's a lot of digital splitting of plates in order to make this sequence work. But we found this place, and I love the notion of her doing this dance for him that took the place of all of possible seduction that comes later. I mean, everything from the moment she does that spin, and then when she drops to the floor, which I still don't know how Catherine who doubled Kate, I have no idea how a human being does that. The night that we came to shoot this, we'd seen Catherine on videotape, and Michelle Johnson, the choreographer, had sworn by her, this is the woman, and we'd seen her on videotape, and we were amazed, and she showed up, and we planned that we were going to do head replacement, and we were going to do all this digital work on it. And Catherine Crockett has the most amazing face that you've ever seen. So, I mean, aside from being able to do things with her body that are heretofore unimaginable, she also is stunningly beautiful. And so we were like, wow, she saved a whole bunch of money on visual effects. But she came in, and we had, you know, there's all these guys in shorts with, you know, mag lights and walkie-talkies and stuff walking around, and here comes Catherine, and she walks up in an identical wardrobe as Kate, and she starts dancing, and just the sound of people's chins hitting the floor, which is it's like thud, 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 thud. And you would think a scene that takes place in the dark with a woman dancing for a man in a gazebo would be, yeah, right, let's get this done. And the Grips and Electrics were like, well, maybe you should do one more. I don't know, Dave, is that your best work? You should really. But it was a fun scene to shoot. She's truly amazing. And actually, Kate did a lot of she does all the stuff coming forward. She does a lot of obviously all the looks every time you see her face. But the wide shots, Catherine did the wide shots, and she did that one shot where we boom and she drops to the floor. This last line was an idea that Eric and I discussed, which was the notion of how people's lives are defined by opportunities, and often by the opportunities that they don't choose to avail themselves of. And again, that goes to the notion of regret. I didn't want Benjamin's life to all be about missed opportunities, but there should be a notion that we needed. And that was a line that Eric came up with that I thought was a beautiful one. This is funny. This is literally the cheapest effect that we did in the entire movie. We had 3 different body doubles come in and put their shirts on. And then we had Brad stand in the exact same place. And then we did this tilt up to him and literally counted it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we had Brad put his shirt on. And then we split the 2 things together in Final Cut Pro. I love the notion of somebody getting younger all alone, and that it's comes at a time when you see again another body being carried out of the old folks' home and whisked away. It was kind of based on this. I lived in this apartment building right off La Brea in the mid '90s, and I would go to work at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning if I had a commercial shoot or something, and early on. And there was an old folks' home or a retirement home, and there's always an ambulance out there at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and they would sometimes there'd be 2, and they'd always sort of whisk these people away in the middle of the night. I love that as a notion, that people who come to sort of take the dead away. And then we have the reintroduction of Benjamin's father, and finally I think Jason's comfortable because now he's under 3.5 inches of prosthetic latex, so he doesn't have to worry about being recognized. But this is a particularly kind of difficult makeup because it had to be subtle, but you had to get the idea that something was wrong with him, that he was gaining weight, and that he has to look sick. I thought that they got that idea across.
Benjamin, do you know anything about buttons?
That was a scene that we reshot, mostly because we had a wig in New Orleans when we shot the sequence the first time on Brad that made him kind of look, it was one of the first things that we did with him, and he looked kind of like Clark Kent, had this curl in the middle of his forehead, so I freaked out.
We moved to New Orleans, where my father had the wisdom to make our own buttons. So
I love this scene. It is an odd sort of Dickensian twist. A father who's never had the inclination, and finally he's ill, and he knows he doesn't have much time left, and he's sort of insinuating himself back into someone else. I mean, I don't know whether he wants Benjamin to take care of him, or I think he just wants some kind of, he's alone. He wants to matter in some way. And I never had the answer to this, and I'm not so sure Brad or Jason were concerned with what is it that he's looking for. I kind of like the desperation of a character who isn't exactly sure of what it is that he wants from his son. I think that's kind of more truthful in a weird way. We don't really know what it is we want from our kids. We just, show us options.
your mother died, giving birth to you. I thought you were a monster. I promised you, Mother, I'd make sure you were safe. I should never have abandoned you.
I love this look. That's my favorite shot of Brad's makeup in his midlife, because I just love the way that the shadows and the glasses and everything work with the wrinkles in his forehead and his inquisitory kind of eyes.
The day began. It was as if I was the only one alive.
This scene was really hard to figure out what it was going to be, because it's so much of a see and say. He walks down the hallway and we have to see this row of pictures, and we got some beautiful pictures. This was put together by the art department, the props department, and the still photography department, and there was some beautiful integration of period photographs. But I love the notion of somebody looking through a window and seeing an empty kitchen, and somebody else saying, "Ah, man, that was some of the best times of my life," or looking through that window. It's very simple. There's something very kind of primitive about it. I love Brad's wig in this scene. I love the little patches of bald head that you can kind of see through his thinning hair. And I like the way that they sort of finally do look like father and son in an odd way, even though no effort's been made to sort of pull them together. And yet their looks are sort of estranged as well. And again, on top of the Dickens reveal that his father has been lurking all this time and has kept an eye on him. And then, of course, you go to Taraji, who's just pissed off. You know, how dare he come back and want something from you when he gave none of us anything, not even a hint. And I like the way that it ends with, "Good night, Mama." And then just when you think things are too morose, ladies and gentlemen, Ted Manson.
Tell you, I was struck by lightning 7 times. Once I was walking my dog down the road.
We did terrorize the dog a little bit in this shot, I will be honest. Just because I think people with flash paper and they're triggering their own explosions is just something dogs can never be made used to.
Shakes out of nowhere. Always losing my line of thought.
But I love his face in this. I remember his daughter came down the day that we shot this and she was watching it, and it was such a nice kind of little, because, you know, the camera just loves his face so much. We had so much fun shooting the close-up. We'd shoot take after take after take. And, you know, they were all a little bit different, but mostly it was just wanting to watch Ted say it one more time. Did I ever tell you? I love this, the Exorcist shot as he steps up to the front of the house. Originally in the movie, Benjamin takes his father to a mountaintop and he carries him the last, mile or whatever up the mountain, and they sit down, they watch the sunset. And we wanted to move it to Lake Pontchartrain and wanted to make it somehow connected to the story. But the notion that this act of, he's not absolving his father, to my mind, he's just saying to him, there was nothing I was lacking for, so you don't have to feel guilty about me, but you're not absolved of whatever it is that's going on for you, but know that it doesn't in no way affected me. He had a complete life, and I love that about Mahershala Hashbaz Ali's characterization. Is like, there's a guy who's a very simple, decent, lovely guy who took this kid in and taught him how to read and write and sent him out into the world and took care of his mom, and so he was lacking for nothing. And so then when this weird, scarred, desperate diabetic comes back into his life, he's able to just say, let's go to the lake, we'll watch the sunrise together, I'll do what I can. And a lot of people take it literally that he dies this moment on the on the pier, and it's not intended that he died this very moment. It could actually have been 9 days and 14 hours later. So I give the literal something else to chew on. There was a thing that was written initially about Benjamin leaving him 54 buttons, 1 button for every year of his life. And we had that in there, and then it seemed a little too linguistically ornate.
Yo, mama.
A baby.
A lot of the perspective of the world in these periods is based on things my father told me about Paris in the 50s and Broadway theater in the late 50s. And, and my dad was from the South, but from Texas. He didn't like opera, but there were certain things about sort of low culture, because certainly Broadway musicals are hardly high culture. But there was something sort of exciting about, especially this play, which was something that Eric was wed to. He really liked the idea of Agnes de Mille and sort of what she brought to the modern flair to Carousel. This study in modernity. And we went and got the Library of Congress photography. They'd photographed this number, this dance, this sexual, and Rochelle I think she took a lot of it from the Fox movie as well, but it was mostly from the stage play. And it was such a primitive thing, and yet, primitive in that it was very sparse, and yet when you put it in this environment, you put it on this beautiful stage, this ornate stage, and you could kind of see what it was that was sort of exciting in 1947 about Carousel. And the music is beautiful. This is a scene that needed a lot of kind of posthumous makeup work because it was all about the seams. It's all about top light and how things hit him and little tiny things that we needed to do to Kate just to make her. At this point in the movie, I think she's 26 or 27, and Kate looks 23 in real life, so we had to actually sometimes make her look a little older. A lot of people don't like the fact that Benjamin is, a bit of a wallflower. But it seemed, again, child of the Depression and child, grows up around a lot of old people and deals with a lot of death, and there's sort of an even keel thing that he has. If you have friends or if you know anybody who was 14 or 15 and their parents were in their 50s, it was just it's kind of a different animal than most.
I better get changed. Griffith is going to a party. Would you want to come?
Talk to me about a restaurant. I thought you might enjoy. I made a reservation, just in case.
Just all the dances go out after the show. Here, you're welcome to come with us. I'll get changed. All right?
This party scene reminds me of, there's a B. Kleben, I think that's how you pronounce it, cartoon that has this woman, this tiny little shrunken head around like a bunch of New York sophisticates, and it's at this party and they're all laughing and she looks very kind of uncomfortable, and the little tagline is, "The callous sophisticates laughed at Judy's tiny head." And so that was sort of my mantra for this scene, is that, he should come in looking sort of like a young Republican and Barry Goldwater supporter, and there should be all these like kind of groovy beatnik people who just can't wait to get away from him. And then he did this thing, where he watched her as she went away and got pulled into this dance, and you could see this shimmering of the liquid on his eyes. He watched this going in it, and he doesn't have to do anything else on his face. He doesn't indicate great pain but it's just the way his eye shimmers and I thought, we shot like 3 takes of it, and the makeup was literally falling off his face by this point. It's 3:00 in the morning, and I was like, we're done. I remember coming out, getting in the car and talking to Sion and going, wow, 3 takes we got. It was just those little tiny things that kind of are better than anything you can plan. I wanted to reshoot this scene. It just didn't, I don't know. It didn't seem right at the time. Now I think it's fine, but I guess it was because it was the last night in New Orleans and we were going to move off to Montreal, and we didn't have the matte paintings of New York City off in the distance over Brad's head. It was this alley behind an ad agency in downtown New Orleans, and it was a great little alley, but it was very colorful. There were all these like kind of purple and orange buildings. Once it was timed and it was dark enough, and it works fine, but I really wanted to redo this in Montreal. We didn't have time, nor could I actually bring myself to ask the actors to do it because they're both good in it.
Seems nice. Do you love him?
You think so?
I love her response, and I love Brad's take on it. He came to this, and he was very wise. He said, I don't think that this is, he wants to dump this on her. This is his thing, and I think Benjamin has to come in and say, look, this is totally my bullshit, and I did come in here thinking I was gonna do something, sweep you off your feet. And there's something so kind of painful about somebody being honest and vulnerable in that moment, and it was surprising.
You couldn't have known.
I was 23. I just didn't care.
What did you do next?
Some photographs, I think, in front of my grave. Yeah. I was as good a dancer.
Sequence coming up, it's always nice when you have to make props for a scene that in some way are going to give you this whole kind of portal into another world. These pictures that Daisy would have sort of hoarded away of what her life was like before she had children, and we found these beautiful photographs from a photo library that were, from different periods, but these amazing shots of ballerinas. And then we did a day of shooting with a digital camera of Kate, and then we put her head on all these photographs that exist, because we wanted it to look like there's a picture from the 40s, a picture from the 50s, and they were all different. They were all over the map. And so we shot them, and then they were photoshopped into it. And I just love doing that kind of stuff. It's that stuff that punches a hole in the story and makes it somehow be further and deeper.
Good night, Daisy.
He said that.
Life wasn't all that complicated.
Then here, of course, is the shot that every trailer house in the fucking world who worked on this movie, and there were about 1 million of them, used that shot of Brad on a motorcycle, which to me seems very West Hollywood, but they loved it.
Benjamin,
There's a nice little transition here that wasn't really planned on, but we were looking for ways to save time so we could bring the clouds in over a Brad shot and then make the wipe to Paris, and he's getting out of the taxi cab, and we have a little matte painting in the upper center of the frame. I love those little tiny matte paintings that just, support the idea that you're in a different place or in a different city, but there's no look, Notre Dame. This is one of those sequences that, ironically enough, reads as very complicated, looks very complicated when you see it finally cut together, but it ultimately is what cinema is, which is that shot butted up against that shot and what it leads you to believe. And the fact of the matter is, it was probably the easiest sequence in the whole movie to shoot. There's a lot of schlepping equipment around and going upstairs, and there's matte paintings to put the chandelier and clean up the theater that we shot in downtown LA to make it look a little more tasteful. But for the most part, every time we put the camera down, we have two shots. We have the cafe with the taxi driver, and we have the cafe without the taxi driver. We have the woman catching the cab, and we have the woman missing the cab. It's an interesting little, there are other little moments that punctuate it that are one-offs, but for the most part, it's like, a friend of mine once had a meeting with Aaron Spelling, and he asked him, what is the secret of your success? And Aaron Spelling thought about it for a while, and he responded, foot chases. And my friend said, well, how do you mean? He said, well, the way that you end up with thousands of hours of television programming, a library that's worth something, is foot chases, because every time you put the camera down, the villain run by, then the angels run by. And that's how you get to 1,000 hours of the library. And I thought, it's kind of what the sequence is. It's like, there's one where you do one shot, the same setup, her shoelace breaks, and same setup, and it doesn't. This was a fun sequence in that it was all about sort of gilding the lily. You would set the camera up and you would kind of say, well, what what else can we connect back to? You know, so it was always like people showing off, like, okay, we're going to see the taxi driver go by in the back, but also we should cut to him in the car. And it's like, okay, we'll drop a camera outside. We'll do 2 cameras at the same time, and we'll see him drive past the window, and then we'll see him. I did add the pigeons to the CG pigeons, but only because we got too good a look at the street, and it definitely looked like sort of a Disneyland version of a
Daisy and a
cobblestone.
across the street, and the taxi would have driven by.
Here's the set we were shooting when Lance Nichols walked back into our lives and said, "Good God, you guys are still shooting this movie?" I think in some way I always knew that I would enjoy the irony of Brad Pitt having to face Cate Blanchett saying to him, "Oh my God, you're perfect." But when we actually got down to shooting it, I mean, A, it's ironic that it comes from her. And B, it's ironic that it's the thing that makes it impossible for them to be together, which I loved. And I gotta say, I think his response here is some of the most poignant being that I've seen from him. I just found his response to it. We didn't have to shoot it many times, but, you know, it was like the words landed and his response was so unbelievably appropriate. And I think we did like 4 or 5 takes.
My God. Look at you.
This is one of those weird scenes where, again, some people argue with me about the whole, as we call it, the sliding doors sequence, that it is in some way there. You are talking about how they were destined to be with one another, because if she hadn't been hit by the car, he wouldn't have gone to Paris and they wouldn't be in this situation. And of course I point out that he does go to Paris, and if she hadn't broken her leg, he wouldn't be in Paris. But then if he wasn't sitting next to her, she wouldn't have the opportunity to say, "Get away from me." So I don't know. I think movies mean different things to different people based on who they are and what they've experienced. There's a lesson to be learned here, and I think it's when you look at Brad in his reaction right here, and you'll see him, she says, "Stay out of my life." And he looks down, and then he looks back at her, and it's almost like a freeze frame. You just go, how does anyone do that? And there's so much that can be transmitted or allowed for the audience to interpret in this simple look to her. I mean, he's obviously taking in how he feels about it, and then he looks at her, and then the fact that he's just a statue there. I mean, it was one of those things that Kirk would, you know, go, "You gotta come see this." Look, and he sustained it for like 10 or 15 seconds. It was astounding.
I didn't leave right away. I stayed in Paris for a while to look out for her.
This is a last minute thing that we decided to do, where we wanted to put the reflection of the window so that we knew that Brad was across the street. We just shot that from a window in Montreal, and we had a plate of him walking by, and then we sort of put the window in later at DD. I think they just did it with a still camera.
I'll take the train to Lourdes.
I love the notion that this giant explanation of where she went, where those lost years went as she learned to walk again. I love the fact that her daughter's out of the room trying to get the nurse to come back in while all that's going on. And we hear it, and yet it's somehow lost.
He says I went back home, and then there's a
Just the physical things that Kate was able to kind of continue to do over 9 days, her little Parkinsonian shudder with her hand and the way she grasped that kerchief the entire time. Pretty amazing stuff. I mean, from just a physical standpoint. So this is a shot that was done by Helicopter 2nd Unit, and they'd been trying all day to get the boat closer and closer to the lighthouse. But it's Lake Pontchartrain, so the water's like 3.5 feet deep at that point. So they kept bottoming the sailboat out and having to sort of pull back. So finally we got that shot, and then we added the clouds into it. We called this the Walk of Shame sequence, which was all the women in his life who kind of get, "Hey, thank you very much," you know, the one-night stands. as much as I'd like to say this is what we intended to do, you got to watch when he throws the rope as the sailboat comes up. He throws the rope and it literally wraps itself around the pole and ties the boat off. And I was like, it's very subtle, but I don't know if there's anything cooler in movies than a guy hopping off a moving sailboat who gets to toss the line and it actually ties itself around the dock. And here is, of course, hours and hours and hours of prosthetic makeup that was just not quite ready for prime time that we ended up kind of cutting around on Taraji. I love the reveal of this. I remember shooting this, and when he steps forward and the camera kind of pans over and we see Kate behind him kind of going, wow, that's a great re-entry.
You want to know where I've been?
There used to be the whole explanation of Lourdes and the shop that she had and working in a florist and all these things that she did between sending him away and not wanting to ever have him back in her life and reappearing on the doorstep. And we got to this point where Eric and I were discussing, and I said, I think she should just ask him, do you want me to tell you? And he says, no. And I love the idea of, you know, a relationship where people can be that honest with one another. And he goes further to say, I don't want to ruin it, which I think is also equally as great. And I think that's Eric's contribution to make it a little more palatable. But I do like the notion of a woman saying, don't you want to know where I've been? And it's just, nope. I don't know that he had a response. I don't think he said absolutely. I think she says sleep with me, and then he just takes her in his arms. And I think Brad during the rehearsal said absolutely, and we thought, you got to do that. There's a great scar on her knee, by the way. Greg Canham did that.
I asked her to come away with me. We sailed into the Gulf along the Florida Keys.
So now we go to the what I call the honeymoon sequence, or what we refer to as the honeymoon sequence, and the shot that a lot of people have an issue with. Now, again, this is not meant to mark. I'm not going to tell you if it's Mercury, Redstone, or Saturn, or whatever. It doesn't fucking matter. The important thing is that they were off the Florida Keys and they saw something that they'd never seen before, and they spent time with one another. And in the middle of that, instead of this music telling you, look, everything's great, the music is sort of telling you it's not for long. That was this underwater shot that we tried, over, I think, about 3 different days to get. And finally we had a specialist come in and shoot that as a second unit thing, because we had a whole crew with weights on, like at the bottom of this lagoon, and we had no visibility, and it was just a nightmare. There was a scene in the rain where they got to talk about what it's like to finally have found one another, and we ended up playing that scene in VO over the honeymoon. But it was funny because Kate showed up. It was the first day of shooting with her, first night of shooting with her, and she was extremely emotional. And I thought it was something that I was doing. I thought in some way I wasn't. But she kept apologizing. I'm sorry, and she would kind of get teary-eyed, and it wasn't quite the right tone for the scene. So we ended up playing the scene in the wide shot and hearing what they were saying. And then this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I love what they talk about. It's such a quiet regret. And I think it's beautiful the way that he couches it.
are you thinking?
I was thinking how nothing lasts. What a shame that is.
Some things last.
Good night, Daisy.
Good night, Benjamin.
We had to do an enormous amount of retouching to take his tattoos off and his he had a little scar from his measles inoculation, so we had to like do all that because of course Benjamin's never been to a doctor. Well, until earlier.
Mm-hmm. When did you meet Dad?
Sometime after that.
I really liked the idea that Eric had about sort of introducing this notion of jealousy because they're getting now into the 60s and now all of a sudden Julia's asking, well, wait a minute, you're starting now to really infringe on the memory of my father. And there's all these pages about how great and groovy this Benjamin guy is. And I love the way she played it. It's so quiet and kind of like, is this going to make me uncomfortable? Or is this going to make me angry because I'm uncomfortable? I am uncomfortable.
Queenie?
Hello?
Hi, Mrs. Carter. It's Benjamin. Where is everybody?
Oh, Benjamin.
Originally, there was a scene that took place in the Caribbean where kind of the ghost of Queenie comes to kiss Benjamin and say goodbye to him. And the weird thing was that we thought there was kind of a odd and strange precursor to the news that Queenie's died. And of course, everybody, when they saw it, immediately went, oh, Queenie died. So everyone was waiting for the revelation when we get back to the house. So we locked it.
I'm so sorry for your loss. She was a great woman.
And again, I love the notion that when his father died, nobody came, and it was quiet, and there was no sense of remorse. And then, of course, when Queenie dies, people have no problem just bawling their eyes out because she's beloved and she made an impression. And here was this guy who had all this money and influence, and he couldn't make an impression even on his own.
I think we're going to be so happy here. Oh, a long family history you have.
They come with the house.
Asked to see the master suite.
We bought ourselves a duplex.
We found this duplex on, I don't know what the street was named, I can't remember, but it was right across from a little park. And it was such a beautiful little place. We thought this would kind of be a great place for them to play house. Or is this going to make me angry because I'm uncomfortable? I am uncomfortable. And then, of course, you have to have a big musical montage. And, we looked at Sam Cooke and we looked at other people that were on the Tammy Show and we looked at other Ed Sullivan guests. And nothing said the 60s like the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. And of course, we shot this on a soundstage, so there's blue screens out the windows everywhere. And one of the interesting things was originally it was this giant motion control. We were going to do this big camera move that kind of circled around the whole stage. And then I started thinking, well, it's kind of the beginning of situation comedy. And so I liked the idea. We ended up cutting all these holes in the set and poking 5 cameras in and just locking the cameras off and then rolling and saying, go. We'd change the lighting and we'd say, okay, it's nighttime and you're going to bed and we're not telling you what to do, and roll. And we would roll and they would come in and they would sort of inhabit the set and run around and do whatever. And nobody really had any idea what it was going to be. And then we'd dissolve between the things and show the passage of time. And it worked out in this weird sort of it's kind of like a mod I Love Lucy. We came in the morning and we sort of talk about, okay, well, this will be a month later or this will be 6 months later, and they would say, well, we're still in a mattress on the floor? Yeah. And they would say, okay, fine. So what are we doing? Now we're painting. So it's like, okay, quick, somebody go out and get some house paint. And it was that. It was just literally like, who has a good idea? Let's do that. But once, in a weird way, because we found the angles that we wanted, and then once we sort of had those angles, it was kind of like, well, you could be in the bathroom and you could go in the hallway and you could be in the living room, and the living room had 2 angles on it, and then we had an angle in the kitchen that could see into the living room. And so we had it all sort of mapped out and covered. And then it was just roll. And we did that for a day, because originally it was going to be this motion control thing that probably would have taken like 2 or 3 days to do. So we did it for exigency's sake. We were shooting out on these sort of running shots on these deserted roads, and it was an overcast day, and there were no clouds in the sky, and there was no lightning, and we shot this, and I turned it over to Craig Barron, and I just said, give me an electrical storm, just give me a little like perturbing moment of barometric pressure. And so he came back with that, and it was one of the most beautiful shots. And then of course we had to do fake all these sunsets because we needed continuity on them, and there was no way to do it. So on these overcast days, we would go out and radically underexpose what was happening in the foreground, and then we put a 20K up on a dimmer at the end of the pier, and then we would bring the 20K up, and it would illuminate their faces, and then literally everything from behind them looking at the sky was added by Matt World.
Right there and then, she realized none of us is perfect forever. She found peace. She opened a studio and taught young girls how to dance.
This was fun. I mean, Michelle Johnson, who's the choreographer, sort of gave Kate like 5 or 6 things to talk about or do, and Kate would just do them over and over and over, and we would have the little girls going back for. And to find a piece of footage where the girls weren't sort of smiling at the fact that Kate was doing the same thing over and over again was rare, but when we did find them, they usually worked. This dance is the beginning of the dance that was the whole dance that took place at the gazebo, and we ended up trimming a lot of it, so this looks like a separate thing. But Ren Kleiss put in this fantastic crackling sound of like cartilage in her knee when she lifts her knee. It reminds me so much of what it takes for me to get out of bed these days.
Never get it back. I figure you were born in 1918, 49 years ago. I'm 43. We are almost the same age. Meeting in the middle.
Finally caught up with each other. Wait. I want to remember us just as we are now.
I think Kate, when she breaks the news to Brad about the baby, is as beautiful as she's ever been. And it's so simple. It's such a simple moment. And I love his not knowing whether he should feel betrayed or happy or both, or exactly. He literally, you see him in that one moment on his face, he just puts off worrying about it for a while.
You know, I swear the nurse slipped and said it was a boy.
All the stuff that we did on the streetcars, we had to do blue screen because the public works was not working in New Orleans when we shot this stuff, so none of the streetcars actually worked.
I know you're afraid.
Not hiding it.
Okay.
This is a scene that was, I loved her in this kind of smock with her chubby belly, and I loved how she is having a Sunday in the middle of the night. But we shot this on a soundstage in LA, and we had to match to the exterior. So I was never really that happy with the lighting in terms of what we were sort of stuck with. Would have been nicer to make it a little bit prettier. But I like the scene, and I especially like the part of the scene where she says, I have to go pee, because it just seems so like a real conversation that two future parents are going to have. And I also like the fact that, here she is, by this point, she's in her 40s in the movie, and this is something that she wants so much. And I totally believe her, when she says that, I completely buy it.
I've accepted that. Loving you was worth everything to me. I have to go pee.
don't know why the phone rings at that moment. I still don't, I've never gotten a satisfactory answer as to why that phone rings. But it does once. And then there's the moment from Calais where we see the beach and Elizabeth Abbott arriving, which was the first thing that we ever shot with Tilda, who showed up to go into 5 hours of like wrinkly makeup so that we could then cover her whole body. And she's covered in lard and she has a robe on, so she didn't really need to do it. But the thing was, we wanted to have her coming out of the surf, and what we didn't account for is, of course, that a 6-foot tall woman walking in 9 inches of water out of the surf and at Lake Pontchartrain does not look like a woman coming out onto the beach of Calais. There was originally a scene that sort of separated the announcement of her pregnancy with sort of the Nighthawks scene in the diner. And it was Julia asking, when was this? And it sort of tipped the hand too early that the baby was going to be her. Kate did some great screaming on the looping stage. Just was trying to figure out in 1968 or 69 or whatever, what would probably the person delivering the baby would not have been a doctor. There probably would have all been like paramedics in outfits that look like post offices. But I just wanted the person who came out of the doorway to look official enough.
Everyone's fine. She's a perfectly healthy baby girl.
This is a baby that was probably 4 weeks old. We debated whether or not we were going to cover the baby in jam, and when we brought in there, the baby was a little bit damp. Its hair was damp. It was a little bit, but it looked great, and so we had to shoot this very quickly. We could only have this baby for about 45 minutes, and it worked out really well. I don't really understand the logic behind it. It's a production management DGA thing. Whenever you're going to use children, like infants, they always say, get twins. Which is insane because there's always a good twin and a bad twin. You're going to bring 2 kids down that look exactly alike, and one of them is totally useless and you can't bring them anywhere near the set before they burst into tears. And for the most part, they make the other twin completely uncomfortable. And so I just want to erase this idea out of the handbook forever. Just figure out a way that you can block it with another baby and then know that it's a total roll of the dice when you bring in the one that you want to see. But don't get twins. I do think we should receive some sort of compensation from Lubriderm, but I'm not going to push it. It was just one of those things that, you know, when you get into the dressing of a set and you kind of go, well, yeah, you would see something like this there. And the fact that it ended up in every frame was happenstance.
Nobody can tell you exactly where it's going to hit.
You grew as the doctor had promised, normal and healthy.
You're gonna have to find a real source.
So the child in this shot is actually blue screened because the twins that we had that played Little Caroline, whenever they would see Brad Pitt, they would burst into tears, which I understand. But it was a cause of great concern. And what we ended up doing was shooting the wide shot with Brad touching in Shiloh. He brought his daughter in and we put her in, and then we brought the on-camera baby and we put the on-camera baby in there, and then we put a blue screen behind her, and then we shot it, and then we literally have like every frame that you see of the child in the sandbox is every frame that was available to us before she burst into tears.
Lady.
And then we would move on to this shot. There was the POV shot of, you know, Kate looking through the window, and she's supposed to see both of them. And we finally gave up and just put Shiloh in Brad's arms and let her let go of the balloon. During the critical decision in the movie, which is Benjamin's decision to leave Daisy and Caroline, there was a lot of discussion had by everyone involved about whether or not Benjamin should know that he has a child by Daisy, or whether or not he can leave her once there was this it was twofold thing. Some people suggested that he leave before he knows that Daisy's pregnant, and other people said, well, she should be 4 or 5 years old so that he's like made an impression on her and that she won't miss him that much. And I was kind of the mind that he should go before she's a year old so she'll never remember him. But we went around and around and around, and finally Kate, in the middle of a rehearsal day, we said, people are kind of scared with this idea of him leaving you while you sleep. She goes, well, that's because I should wake up and I should look right at him, and he should have to make a choice right in front of me. And that's a perfect example of why Kate Blanchett is so fucking great, because it's not that she solved the problem, she just focused the attention on what the issue was. And to me, I think she made the scene so much better, because you watch it and you go, this is the difficult follow through once you've made a decision to be with somebody and have a kid with them, And I thought it was sort of an exquisite distillation of exactly how, she's not afraid of doing stuff that's not going to be liked. Oh my God, the character's unlikable. She just wants it to be dramatic, and she wants it to be about, let's put the audience in a hard place. If they've decided now that they hate Benjamin, okay, more power to them, because he is going to come back, and there is going to be a scene where they discuss, where, Daisy gets to say, I could not have done this.
They're all for me. 5. I wish I could have taken you to your first day of school.
This was a moment that both Eric and I felt was necessary, because there's nothing that the reading of the will did for Julia. And so we needed to give her a moment where he could express his regrets about having never met her. Some people buy it, some people don't.
Some boy. I wish I could have held you when you had a broken heart. I wish I could have been your father. Nothing I ever did will replace that.
I thought she did wonderful. I was very worried about the scene, and then on the day when we shot it, I was like, wow. I thought it was very moving. Now, my friend Tarsem did me an incredible solid, and we cut him loose. Brad was going to be in a bunch of different places over the Christmas holidays, and so we sort of sent him an Aeroflex, and he flew to all these places. And originally we were going to go to like 10 other locations, and so I think in 4 days he shot us all the material that we could ever want on what I call the the razor's edge montage. If you got to get somebody to do second unit, you might as well get somebody who can shoot better than any DP or director that I know of. We get these videotapes because he insists on working with people who send videotapes. But he would shoot this film and then film. And then he would transfer it to videotape, and we would watch it, and we'd just be like, God, it's so beautiful.
I'll see you next Thursday. Oh, good night, sweetheart. I'm sorry, we're closing. Can I help you? Are you here to pick somebody up?
A lot's been made out of this scene as being the sort of culmination of all the digital trickery, and that this really is the and I gotta say, you know, when we went to Lola and we talked to Edson for the first time about what we wanted to do, and I didn't think we could do this. But we shot the stuff with all the little white tracking markers on Brad's face and literally turned it over to them and just said, we apologize in advance. Do the best you can. And they ended up doing, you know, a lot of work on Kate, giving her more spots and contrast on her chest and making some of the joins on the prosthetic pieces more subtle. And they did so much work. We took microphones out of, you know, we had microphones in the mirrors, we had I mean, there's so much work that was done on the scene to stitch it all together, make it cohesive. But it is kind of one of those things when you see, you know, like when he shakes Robert's hands, like you just go, wow, how old is he? He looks like he's 25-ish.
It was very nice to meet you. We'll be in the car, darling.
I'm just locking up.
This is the hardest shot in the movie. This is the one that pretty much, I think it took about 9 months because he's moving the entire time. The camera's moving and he has to turn around. And you have to go, okay, well, they did it. Once he's holding still, things are, but the head turn.
She seems a little lost. Then who isn't at 12?
And again, you know, we wanted to, you know, Brad has this little scar on his cheekbone. And as a story point, he gets it in the Second World War. And of course, it's on the face of the baby when the baby dies at the end.
He's incredibly kind. He's a bright, adventurous man.
I love the cue that's happening underneath this. I really feel like Alexandre understood what it was to. There's something kind of a little macabre about it, and yet it also has this sadness. Those are two hard things to put together.
I've been raising both of you. I'm not that strong.
When we stage the scene and they walk off down the hallway, you know, they're going out the back door of the dance studio. There was this beautiful thing where they were walking side by side and they were both sort of looking at their feet and didn't know what to say to one another, and it sort of epitomized the awkwardness again of still being committed to somebody in some kind of subterranean way and yet not being able to talk about that in any way, shape, or form. And it was a beautiful little moment. I love this little look that she gives him before she pulls her coat tight and then she walks off. And again, I love the idea that they have a Wagoneer or something. It's kind of a great car. As they pull out, the shadows cast on the wall, there's all this grip equipment and stuff because the camera's been stabilized, and you know, but I said fuck it. It was a good shot to use. And again, I think that the digital work on his face when he watches them drive away is pretty astounding. I like this idea. This was Eric's idea that somehow she kind of remembers. I remember that kid that day. That was, you know, I thought that was kind of interesting, and it's not creepy. It's just sort of, you know, you kind of go, wow, that was my dad. I did note it in some weird way, and I don't know why.
That night, while I was sitting and wondering why I came back at all, there was a knock at the door.
Come in. You all right?
I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm doing here.
For this love scene that took place, we brought in a woman who was in her 50s and a young man who was in his early 20s, and they were body doubles, and they came in and we sort of choreographed this thing with Brad and Kate as to what it would be, what kind of, you know, the ballet of coitus that we would shoot pieces of and we would see. And we had it all worked out, and then we started talking about what would the end of the scene would be and what the beginning of the scene, the next scene, which is Benjamin and Daisy parting. And the notion of seeing this woman pulling on her pantyhose suddenly became for me the thing that I thought, well, that's it all in one shot. I don't need to see the sex scene. I don't need to see the love scene when I have her turned away from her lover of so many years, and to see what's happened to her flesh, and then to cut to him watching. And I thought, it's better than anything you can act out. It's like and it's so mundane, and yet it is so much about when you're with somebody for a long time, you see them, you see them getting out of the shower and sitting on the toilet or getting dressed and pulling on their pantyhose. And then, of course, Kate came up with the capper, which is "Goodnight, Daisy, goodnight, Benjamin." This was a matte shot that we did, the POV, because the place just looked too kind of nice and clean, and I wanted it to be sort of a nastier hotel. So Matt World came in and grungied it all up.
Further past there was a claw.
Hello. Yes, speaking. I'm sorry, I don't...
So now we get to the section of the movie where some people have issue with the fact that this is the most interesting part of the movie, and really the stuff of him growing up and being a little old man, and that's really the part that could be jettisoned from the movie, and that the focus should be on what it is like to be this old soul in the body, and this person with all this life experience in the body of an 11-year-old. And to those people, I say, I think you should make that movie. And when you do, I'm happy to watch it.
I'm Daisy Fuller.
I'm David Hernandez with the Orleans Parish Department of Child Welfare Services. He was living in a condemned building.
And here's Joel Bissonette. Now, Joel is one of my favorite people, and he was the one who did the first test that we ever did on Benjamin Button. We used Joel, and we created an old age makeup, and we took that old age makeup and we put it on Robert Tower's body, and that was the first test that we ever did. I know he's seen it. I don't know if he has it. I have to get him a copy of that on DVD or something. He and Robert Towers worked on this movie as long as I have, so it's like 7 years.
Benjamin?
Oh.
So when we were designing all the handoffs and trying to decide, okay, well, this actor is going to play the body from here, and Brad's going to do the face, and then we're going to eventually get to a point where Brad watches Kate get in the cab and drive away, and then we're going to jump forward 15 years, 14 years. And people have asked, well, why didn't you do the euthanizing, as we like to call it, for the 11-year-old piano-playing Benjamin? And the answer is, we ran out of money. And I also felt like he's a different person now. He's in no way related to who he was. He's forgotten everything.
If I sit with you, I would love to hear you play.
Do I know you?
And every day I would stop by to make sure that he was comfortable.
A lot of these rants that were the notion of the dementia, this is based on Eric's actual experience with his father and some of the things that his father was saying in his final months. It's odd because I think people who've watched that kind of disassociative withering of somebody, you know, they're very, people who've been through that are incredibly moved by this sequence. And people who haven't, you have a teenager who has no idea what early onset dementia or what's going on, and they're kind of like, he's acting really weird. The kid who plays Benjamin when he has his like little outburst and breaks plates and stuff is this kid named Chandler, who we were very kind of concerned about whether or not we could get him to kind of let loose and go on a tirade. And we rolled camera, and of course, because he gets to swear, Obviously, his parents had told him it was okay, and this kid just cut loose. It was so funny to watch him. And then Charles, who plays Benjamin when Benjamin's on the roof, again, it was this thing of like, well, we're gonna have to tether him off, and he's gonna have a wire, and there's a stunt man, but you still have to talk the kid into standing up on the roof. And it's like, are you okay with being up on the roof? And he couldn't get him off. Like, he could not. I mean, with a hook, you couldn't get this kid off the roof. We were setting up to do this shot. We just want to see Kate sort of tugging this child along as he's forgetting how to walk. And she walked off down the sidewalk, and they kind of edged over to the edge of frame and disappeared behind the tree. And then right at this moment, the little boy tugs on her hand, and she bends down to find out what it is that he wants, and he puckers up his lips and gives her this kiss. And I'm watching this on the monitor, and I'm going, oh my God, that's amazing. I mean, I wish it was a little more center frame, but it's amazing. And the picture starts to bounce. The whole image starts to bounce. And I look over, and Kim Marks, who's a camera operator, has taken his eye off the eyepiece, and he's looking at me, and he's giving me the thumbs up, and he's nodding his head, and the picture is... and I'm yelling at him, turn around and put your eye on the eyepiece. And we had to go back in and stabilize the shot, because it was... one of those things where the happy accident becomes your friend, and then, of course, your enemy is enthusiasm and excitement. We had an animatronic baby made. We were ready to go with a CG baby. And finally, on the day, we brought in these little babies, and we asked the parents not to feed them in the morning and not to let them have a nap, so that they were very tired. And then they were breastfed and brought and put in Kate's arms, and she like cooed to them for a while, and then this kid just went to sleep right in her arms. And as the camera pulled back and she covered the face of the baby, the mother got very upset because it's such a distinct thing to pull a sheet over someone's face. It is not about anything else other than their demise. And she was noticeably agitated by this. And of course, I would have been upset too. But it's one of those things that you kind of can't plan for how people are going to respond to images. If we told them in advance, they probably would have been fine. But I was kind of winging. I said, you know what, try this one. Because she did one where she tried to kiss the baby, and then the baby would wake up. And she did one where I said, just take the blanket and just put it over them. Or maybe actually Kate may have just done that. She may have just invented that. And she pulled the blanket over the baby's face, and the mother, who was watching the thing over my shoulder, got really, really upset, and I apologized.
Some people are born.
And here's what we like to call the Little Britain moments, which is where it's a curtain call for everybody. And I love this idea of, suddenly kind of stepping out into the fable again for the last little moment, even though because you're dealing with tough stuff, and then to have a little cushion.
Some know Shakespeare, some are mothers.
So Jessica, who was Kate's dance double, we had to do this final shot where Kate's dancing and doing all these turns. And so we ended up having to do that with head replacement. But that's the picture that you see of Kate on the poster for the movie. That was that photograph that we used to kind of put her face on Jessica's body. We had an idea for the backdrop in the title sequence, which was going to be a sort of kinesthesis of the different obituaries for all of the characters in the movie. It was about $250,000, and we didn't have it to spend. And also, somebody said, that's such a downer. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to show obituaries? What is your problem? So, my thing is, if you're going to bring everybody back together at the end and have a big curtain call, at least show their obituaries. But I lost out.